When I was fighting for my life after a horrific accident, I heard the words that shattered everything I thought I knew. My father stood at the foot of my hospital bed, his voice cold and final. "He's not our son. Let him go." Then he walked out like I was nothing. I thought pain couldn't cut deeper than dying until I realized the people who raised me had abandoned me before I was even gone. And yet 1 week later, he came back not for me, not to ask if I had survived, but for the inheritance he believed he deserved. He didn't find money waiting. All he found was a letter, and the truth that made his face turn pale. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. It means a lot to know someone is listening. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If my story touches you, please hit subscribe. It may seem small, but for someone like me who was once silenced and forgotten, every voice, every listener, every bit of support means the world. My name is Jude Harper, and this is my truth. The first thing I registered was light 2, white 2 sharp, cutting straight through the fog in my skull. My chest felt bound, every breath scraping my lungs raw. The steady beep of a monitor filled the silence, each sound a reminder that I was alive, though barely. My left hand twitched against the sheets, and my fingers closed around the only thing grounding me, a silver ring etched with the letter Z. I blinked hard, trying to push back the blur, and a face leaned into view. A nurse with gentle eyes, her voice low enough to thread through the chaos. "You're still here," she whispered. I wanted to answer, but the words stayed locked in my throat. That sentence, soft, fragile, was the lifeline keeping me tethered. The door hissed open, boots on linoleum. A voice I knew better than my own heartbeat, cold and certain. "He's not our son. Let him—" Victor Sterling didn't even finish. The words hung in the sterile air like frostbite. My foster mother, Margaret, lowered her eyes, her hand gripping her purse strap as though it might anchor her. Elliot, my foster brother, said nothing. They all turned, their footsteps echoing as they vanished down the hall. I couldn't even scream. I only heard the scratch of a pen as Nurse Grace recorded something in my chart. Through half-lidded eyes, I caught the detail, 11:04 p.m. A timestamp carved into my memory. The monitor beeped steadily, mocking the quiet collapse inside me. No tears came, just the sensation of something fracturing so silently it almost went unnoticed. A memory slid in uninvited. I was 8, standing in the hallway of the Sterling house on Christmas Eve. The dining room glowed golden, the table set with roast and laughter. I had reached for the chair at the table when Margaret's voice stopped me. "Not this one, Zephyr. Tonight's only for family." I remembered the shame of turning away, the ache in my chest, then eerily similar to the one now. My thumb rubbed against the ridge of the silver ring. Margaret had given it to me when I was 13 on a camping trip to Crater Lake. "It's not worth much," she'd said, smiling faintly. "But it looks nice, like some people do." I hadn't thought about the second half of that sentence until now. The words returned like a knife twist, pretty on the outside, hollow within. Outside the window, snow drove against the glass, each gust a reminder of the storm raging inside me. And then, when despair threatened to pull me under the door, burst open again. A familiar voice, breathless from running, Zephyr Holden Bryce, soaked from the storm, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on me. His hand closed around mine, warm and insistent. Unlike theirs, it didn't let go. When I woke again, the room was softer. Morning light seeped gray through the blinds, and snow had turned to cold rain, tapping the windows. The hallway outside hummed with the faint soundtrack of a Christmas movie. The scent of disinfectant still clung to everything, but something else lingered now, the damp wool of a coat draped across the chair beside me. My hand was still in his. Holden sat, slouched hair plastered from rain exhaustion carved deep under his eyes. When I stirred, his grip tightened. He leaned forward, voice rough but steady. "You're not alone." My throat refused words, but I found another way. I tapped my finger once against his palm. "Yes." He blinked, startled, then smiled faintly. A system was born, 1 tap for yes, 2 for no. When the doctor entered to update my chart, he asked about next of kin who should be listed as emergency contact. Holden straightened before I could move a muscle. "I'll do it," he said firmly. I tapped once against his hand. My chest ached with the effort, but for the first time I felt like someone had claimed me. Later, as Grace checked the machines, I drifted. A memory surfaced sharper than the sting of IV needles. I was maybe 12, standing in front of a nearly empty mantel at the Sterlings. I had asked Margaret once why there were no baby photos of me. She had smiled tightly. They were ruined in the flood when we moved. Nothing survived. Back then, I'd believed her. Now, lying in that hospital bed with the echo of Victor's words still freezing in my ears, I began to question everything. Holden leaned close when he saw the change in my eyes. "They haven't come back," he admitted quietly. "Not once." The truth lodged in my throat heavier than any bandage. As dusk settled, Holden fought to stay awake, but exhaustion won. His head dropped back against the chair, his coat damp and heavy like he'd wrestled the storm itself just to be here. I stared at him, at the small rise and fall of his chest, at the way his hand never fully let go of mine even in sleep. The rain streaked down the window, catching the flicker of holiday lights outside. For years I had wondered if family meant the ones who raised you, or the ones who showed up when it mattered. Watching Holden keep vigil beside me, the answer no longer felt so complicated. And then when the room was hushed and I was half drifting, I forced my finger against his palm again. A message, a request. He stirred, brow furrowing as he bent closer. "Your apartment," he guessed. I tapped once. "You want the box under your bed?" Another tap. He hesitated. "I've seen a letter there before, sealed, addressed to you, from E. Harper." The name thundered through me like a crack in ice. I tapped once hard. Holden's eyes darkened with worry, but he nodded. "I'll get it, no matter what." For the first time since the crash, a new storm gathered, not outside the window, but in my chest. And this one promised to tear open everything I thought I knew. 2 days after the crash, the sky over Portland finally cracked open enough to let in a weak pewter light. I wasn't cleared to leave, but Holden had energy where I didn't, and he took it back to my place in the Pearl District. He called as he stepped inside. I could hear the hollow echo of my apartment through the phone, quiet, bare, the kind of quiet that made you think twice about your own breathing. Outside his end of the line, a streetcar chimed and rolled past, the sound threading into the room like a memory that refused to sit still. Neon from the bar across the street bled red along the wall. "I've got the box," he said, breathless. "Under your bed, exactly where you said." "Camera," I rasped, and he switched to video. The image tilted as he set the phone on the table and dragged the cardboard box into the neon glow. He slit the packing tape and folded back the flaps. On top sat a thick brown envelope, the edges gone soft with years. My name was written, in careful pen, for Zephyr Kane. In the corner, a return address, E. Harper, Boise ID. Holden looked up at the screen. "You sure?" I nodded once. His thumbnail slid under the flap and eased it open. Paper ticked against the inside like leaves. He lifted out a letter on thin, official stationery. The header read, "A law office in Boise, dated 1997. He read aloud slowly, carefully, like each syllable might do damage if mishandled. "This is to confirm the adoption of Jude Harper, born 1995, by the Sterling family of Portland, Oregon, pursuant to the wishes of the child's grandmother, Evelyn Harper, who retains the right to ongoing contact and notice of major life events." The name landed with a clean, hard strike. Jude Harper. For a second, the hospital room pitched and then righted itself. Jude was a name with weight and bone. It didn't float like Zephyr. It held. I didn't know whether to reach for it or run. Holden kept going. Inside the envelope was a rubber-banded stack of certified mail receipts from 2010 to 2014. "All returned," he murmured, tilting them so I could see the red stamps. "Return to sender. Address not found." On one in ballpoint, someone had scrawled, "Margaret moved, ask Victor." The ink had pressed through the paper from a heavy hand. He pulled out a clipped newspaper obituary, Evelyn May Harper, 1943-2018, a photograph of a woman in a nurse's uniform, smile reserved but kind. Died peacefully, survived by her sister, by colleagues who called her meticulous, compassionate, steady. There was no mention of me. No mention of a grandson who'd been set adrift and then told not to ask why. "Did they ever tell you?" Holden asked, voice soft. I shook my head. The neon licked across the photo, turning the white of her uniform the color of a stoplight. The room smelled like antiseptic and rain, but suddenly I could almost smell starch and hospital soap, the imaginary ghost of her work following me across state lines and decades. There was one more document, thicker stock, a summary sheet. Holden's face tightened as he scanned it. "It's a trust," he said. "Set up by Evelyn. Estimated value $4.5 million. Beneficiary Jude Harper." I closed my fist around the ring, the Z biting into my palm. The letter had carved out a clean path and a chasm at the same time. The name on my hand felt more like a lid than an initial, not a mark of belonging, but something hammered over the truth to keep it quiet. I had worn it like proof for so long. Now it looked like proof of something else entirely. "Keep looking," I whispered. Holden dug deeper, lifting old folders, a curled photo from an art fair flyer I never got to attend, a bundle of junk mail. His fingers paused at the bottom. "There's one more thing." He lifted a photocopy, the paper grainy and gray. The heading hit First Missing Person Report. The name below it stole my breath. Zephyr Kane. Reported 2018. Filed by Victor Sterling. Holden held it closer to the camera, and I read the lines as if they were tattooed into me. Left home. No contact. Concerns about stability. On the date line, 1 week after Evelyn's death. On paper, I had been erased the minute the only person who could call me by my real name left the world. The world didn't even have to try. My life had been rewritten with a form and a signature. I couldn't speak. The monitor ticked. The rain ticked, the streetcar chimed again like a clock that wouldn't mind its own business. Everything loud and small at once. I counted breaths. I pressed the ring harder into my palm until I felt the sting and welcomed it. Zeph, Holden said gently, "What do you want me to do?" For a moment I saw two roads, one where I slid back under the ring and the quiet and let the paperwork do what it had been built to do, the other where I stepped into a name that didn't need their permission. I tapped the bed rail once. Again. The code we'd made in the night. "Take all of it," I managed. To Marion Holt. I didn't say the other name out loud. Not yet. But it was there, ringing clear in the space behind my teeth, as if I'd been calling it through water my entire life. Jude. The neon pooled red over the table as Holden slid each document back into the envelope, careful, methodical, like a ceremony. Outside his window, the streetcar bell sounded one last time, and faded down the line toward a city I hadn't been allowed to know. "I'm on my way," he said. "I won't stop." When the call ended, the room was suddenly too quiet. I turned the ring so the Z faced my wrist and lay back against the pillow, the ceiling lights running into each other until they looked like snow. The first day I left the hospital was in a wheelchair with a blanket over my knees and Portland rain slicking the world to a dull shine. Holden pushed me through the revolving doors and into air that smelled like wet concrete and coffee. We rode the elevator up to a narrow hallway where a glass door bore Marion Holt's name in black letters, steady and unadorned. Her office felt like a small library had been moved upstairs and tucked into a corner of downtown, old wood-sagging shelves, files stacked neatly but everywhere. A yellow lamp turned the room the color of late afternoon. The window showed the Willamette like a sheet of pewter. Marion stood to greet us, sleeves pushed to the elbows, hair spun into a no-nonsense knot. "Mr. Kane," she said, then took in the chair, the blanket, the shock that still lived behind my eyes. "I'm Marion. Let's sit." I told her everything I could without my voice breaking. The crash, the lights, the sentence that cracked the room in half. "He's not our son. Let him..." I told her about the pen scratch in my chart, 11:04 p.m., the minute my life organized itself around a single line of ink. Holden slid the envelope across her desk and walked her through the contents like a field medic calling out what he'd found, the adoption confirmation naming Jude Harper. The mailed letters stamped back again and again, the obituary, the trust summary, the report that claimed I had disappeared. She read without rushing. Every few paragraphs she made a small notation or smoothed the corner of a page. When she finished, she set the last sheet down and leaned back. This isn't just about a family who failed you, she said. This is about fraud, and likely forgery. Whoever filed that report did so with a purpose beyond grief. The words were clean clinical. They steadied me. At the same time, they shoved me up against the thing I'd been avoiding. Two names vibrated inside my skull, colliding zephyr, all air and speed, and nowhere to land, and the other heavier, already carving out space in my chest. Marion lifted the missing person report again. This is the hinge. With this on file, they can claim you were unreachable and try to divert control of the trust. The timing right after Ms. Harper's death will matter. I stared at the paper until it blurred. A different memory surfaced, not because I wanted it, but because it was finally done waiting. 19 and headed to college, I had paused in the hallway with a box of notebooks in my arms. Margaret had stepped out of the kitchen and closed the door behind her. Don't tell people you were adopted, she'd said, voice soft, the way you talk to someone about a stain they can still hide. It's better if they think you're ours. Back then, I'd taken it as advice, a way to make things neat. Now in Marion's office, the words snapped into place with a sound I could feel in my teeth. It hadn't been protection, it had been concealment. Marion set the report down and steepled her fingers. I'm filing a motion to freeze any assets the Sterlings may have used the trust to purchase. We'll subpoena the hospital for that chart note at 11:04. We'll also request communications between the Sterlings and the law office in Boise. If those certified letters were intercepted, we'll find proof. Holden exhaled, shoulders dropping. I hadn't realized how rigid he'd been until that moment. I looked past Marion at the water and the ragged line of winter clouds. The office smelled like coffee and wet wool and old paper. The desk had a water ring where someone once set a cup down and forgot to use a coaster. It wasn't a fancy room, but it felt like it had done work that mattered. What happens when we confront them? I asked. Marion's mouth went almost kind. They'll make it about you, she said. They'll say you're unstable, ungrateful, opportunistic. They'll try to reduce you to a story that suits the paperwork they created. She slid a last page across the desk. There's one line in the report you need to know before we go any farther. She tapped a paragraph near the bottom, and I leaned forward, pulse thudding in my throat. The sentence sat there in ugly clinical font. Subject may be experiencing emotional disturbance and delusional thinking. I swallowed, hard heat rising behind my eyes. That phrase was a door meant to be shut in my face anywhere I went. I thought of Grace's steady voice in the hospital, of Holden sleeping upright with his hand still on mine, of the way Victor's sentence had curled itself into a weapon midair. If they couldn't erase me from a bed with machines keeping score, they'd try to erase me on paper. Marion's voice gentled but didn't soften. We'll rebut it with medical records from last week, clear orientation, lucid consent for an emergency contact. If they want to argue you lack capacity, they'll have to explain why they didn't show up when capacity actually mattered. I nodded, fingers pressing into the desk edge until my nails left half moons in the wood. Somewhere outside, a siren rose and fell. Down the hall, someone laughed, and the sound bounced back as if the building wanted to keep it. Marion gathered the papers into a tidy stack and squared the edges with her palm. We move now, she said. No delays. I'll file today. We'll have a hearing soon. And when we do, you need to be ready to listen to them talk about you like you're a stranger. Ready to hear them say the kinds of things they don't put in holiday cards. The blanket over my knees felt too warm. I slid my hand under it, found the ring, and turned it so the letter faced inward. Holden's chair creaked as he shifted closer, a small sound that somehow made the room feel bigger. I'm ready, I said, though my voice shook on the second word. And then, because there wasn't really another way to say it, I added, I want my name back. Marion didn't ask which one I meant. She nodded, once the decision already moving through her like current. Then let's take it. As Holden wheeled me out, I glanced back at the desk with its water rings and stacks, and at the window where the river kept its slow winter pace. The hallway smelled like rain and elevators. Down on the street, tires hissed on wet pavement. The city looked washed clean for a second before the next wave of weather swept over it. In the elevator's mirrored wall, I barely recognized the man staring back, paler, thinner, edged with something I didn't have before. Resolve, maybe. Or just the refusal to be papered over once more. When we reached the lobby, Holden pushed me toward the doors and a gust of damp air hit my face. I closed my eyes and let it sting. Somewhere deep under the noise of traffic and courthouse chatter, a name rang out. Not the one on the ring, not the one on the report, but the one that had waited for me patiently like a light behind a closed door. I didn't say it. Not yet. But I carried it out into the rain. 3 days after we met with Marion, the rain in Portland seemed to have settled in for the season. It slicked the courthouse steps and smeared the sky into one unbroken pane of gray. Holden wheeled me through the lobby and down a corridor lined with old portraits. The wood benches along the walls looked like church pews, polished by years of people waiting to hear something that might change their lives. In the hearing room, the windows were tall and grim glass fogged by the cold. I could see my breath when I exhaled. Victor was already there, hand tight on the strap of a leather briefcase he probably thought made him look respectable. Margaret sat next to him, eyes on her lap. Elliot leaned back with his arms crossed, the posture of someone who felt protected by a story that had always favored him. They didn't look at me at first. When Victor finally did, his gaze skipped over my face like I was a stranger with no claim to his attention. The judge entered and we rose as much as I could with a blanket over my knees. He took his seat weighed down by papers and a docket that had nothing to do with my history. When he asked for the purpose of the hearing, Marion stood, her voice even. "We're here on a motion for preliminary relief," she said. "Questions of beneficiary status and to preserve assets that may have been diverted." The judge nodded toward Victor. Response. Victor stood clearing his throat as if dignified discomfort might substitute for truth. "Your Honor, Zephyr Kane is no longer a member of our family. He disappeared in 2018. We filed the proper report. We haven't heard from him since." He let the word disappeared stretch out like it excused everything that came after. Marion slid a stack of documents to the clerk and then moved to the lectern. She spoke in a steady rhythm that let the details do the work. The letter from Boise confirming my birth name and Evelyn's conditions, the certified mail receipts stamped and returned, the obituary that marked the end of Evelyn's life and the beginning of my erasure. Then she lifted a single sheet. "This is a contemporaneous medical note from Legacy Emmanuel Hospital," she said. "It records that at 11:04 p.m. the Sterlings left the patient's bedside stating, and I quote, 'He's not our son. Let him,' and then departing without further contact." The words landed with a hard, echoing silence. The judge's eyebrows rose. Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. Elliot's jaw clenched. Holden leaned toward Marion and whispered. She nodded, then turned an iPad toward the bench. "Your Honor, we also have public social media posts that speak to the Sterlings' understanding of their family." She tapped the screen. A photo filled Elliot in a driveway at Christmas, hand on the hood of a new car, twinkle lights reflecting off the windshield. The caption read, "New wheels for the only son." Beneath it, Margaret had commented, "So proud of my only son." The clerk read the caption aloud and the words went into the record, simple as groceries rung up at a counter. Elliot shot to his feet. "He's lying," he blurted, pointing at me like I'd orchestrated the internet. "He was never my brother." The judge didn't raise his voice. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling." I felt my hands shake against the armrests. Another memory flared, Elliot's 16th at a restaurant with linen napkins and a cake so big it needed 2 waiters. My birthday that year had come with a generic e-card and a thumbs-up emoji from Victor. Maybe they thought a real celebration would draw attention to the fact that there was no baby album to pull from, no first steps to laugh about. Marion kept going. "We intend to show not only that Mr. Kane is the rightful beneficiary, but that funds earmarked for his benefit were used for the Sterlings' personal purchases." Victor scoffed. "We did what we had to do. Otherwise, that money would have fallen into the hands of people outside the bloodline." The judge glanced over his glasses, pen hovering. "Are you admitting to reallocating trust resources?" Mr. Sterling Victor's mouth snapped shut. The hearing wound toward its first pause. My body was trembling not from cold, but from the friction of being talked about as if I were both present and invisible. When the judge recessed, people stood, and the room exhaled. My chair didn't move. I stared at the wood grain in the table until it stopped pulsing. Marion's phone buzzed. She glanced down, then frowned. "Anonymous tip," she said quietly to us. She opened the email, and her expression changed from cautious to certain. "What is it?" I asked. "A confirmation of a transfer in December 2018, she said, eyes scanning. "From the Harper Trust to a Sterling account. $450,000. Notes indicate property acquisition." There was only one thing they'd bought that winter. I saw it as clearly as if I were looking through its windows at a living room with new furniture and a Christmas tree still up in January, the house in Bend. Elliot had posted a video of snow flurries swirling in a back porch light, his voice in the background saying he couldn't believe the timing. I turned to Holden and spoke with the thin breath I had left. Now I said, "They're the ones outside the bloodline." He squeezed my hand. Overhead, the lights dimmed to save energy while the judge was gone and the room shifted to a softer gray. The benches looked more like pews than ever. Somewhere a radiator clanged. We waited for the next round. By the time we gathered again in Marion's office, the city had frozen in thin sheets, just enough ice to make every step careful. The lamp on her desk painted everything in honey. File folders were arrayed like a map of a place that finally made sense once you stood far enough back. Marion laid the printout of the transfer on the table. "This is strong," she said. "If we can tie the funds to the Bend property, we're not just talking about a civil dispute. We're in criminal territory." Holden rubbed his knuckles, restless energy skating off him. He bragged about that house the winter after, he said. Posted sunrise videos from the deck. Said something about how the place came at exactly the right time. I added the missing piece I hadn't recognized when it happened. In 2019, he told me they'd finally gotten what they deserved. I'd laughed then, thinking he meant life had evened out after a rough patch at the company. Now the words tasted like borrowed money. Marion's phone rang. She put it on speaker. Marion Holt. A woman's voice came through thin and papery with age. "This is Nora Walsh. I live 3 doors down from the Sterling's old house. I saw your name in the news and thought, well, I thought someone should tell the truth." Marion sat up straighter. "We're listening, Ms. Walsh." "I used to see the mail come," Nora said, memory sharpening her tone. "Big envelopes registered with a return address from Idaho. The last name on them said Harper. Margaret would snatch them up before anyone else even opened the box. One time I heard her laughing on the sidewalk with another neighbor. She said, 'He's not really ours and I won't have him bringing people over like he is.' I felt something loosen in my chest that had been cinched for years. Not relief exactly, but the sudden expansion that comes when a stranger confirms what you've been punished for noticing. Grace's note had given me a time. Nora gave me a witness. "Would you be willing to give a statement?" Marion asked. "I'll say it under oath," Nora replied. "I should have said it sooner." After the call, Marion swiveled to her computer and began drafting. "We'll add her affidavit to the motion," she said, typing. "We'll also request the city's address change history for you." She placed another file in front of me. "We've already pulled a preliminary log. Someone updated your primary residence twice in late 2018, both times to a P.O. box that isn't yours." The requests came through an electronic portal. The account holder used the Sterling office IP. The room tightened and cooled all at once. I pictured Margaret at the kitchen table, the laptop open, her mouth set in that familiar line. I pictured Victor standing behind her, telling her which fields to fill in. 2 clicks here, a confirmation there, and a person becomes harder to find than a package in December. Holden was already fingers deep in his phone. "Found the post," he said. He turned the screen to us. Elliot stood grinning on a snow-dusted porch with mountains blue in the distance. The caption read, "Sometimes luck shows up exactly when you need it." The timestamp sat an exact week after Evelyn's obituary. Marion printed the screenshot and clipped it to the transfer confirmation. The pile looked like evidence in a museum exhibit about how easy it is to rewrite a life if you keep a straight face and move quickly. She poured coffee into 3 mismatched mugs. The steam rose like a word balloon with nothing in it. "We can file an amended motion this afternoon," she said. "I'll ask the court to freeze the Ben property and any accounts that received money from the trust." "What about the report saying I left because I wasn't well?" I asked. Saying the sentence felt like eating tinfoil. We'll counter with the hospital chart that shows you were lucid enough to designate an emergency contact, Marion said. We'll also request records from your primary care provider. If there's no clinical basis for that line, it stays what it is, a convenient narrative. I watched her pen move the tidy loops and slashes. On the windows, condensation made the city outside look like a watercolor, bridges and cranes melting into each other. My mind flickered through rooms I had sat in as a kid, quiet and careful, learning that my safest posture was to take up as little space as possible. It was a strange sensation to sit now at a table where my name did the opposite, unfolding, lengthening, taking its seat. Marion pushed back from the desk and looked at me fully. We're close, she said, but we need to be ready. When cornered, people who lie don't apologize. They escalate. They'll come for you, not just your claim. How I asked, though, I already knew. The report had been a preview. They'll drag your character, she said. They'll question your memory. They'll say you're after money. They'll call your friends enablers. They'll suggest you're unwell. Holden put his hand on my shoulder, grounding. Let them try, he said. We've got dates. We've got signatures. We've got their own words. I nodded. Not because any of this felt easy, but because some motions are made by the body before the mind can talk it out of them. I had been quiet long enough. If they wanted to make me into a story that fit their paperwork, they were about to find out how much louder the truth can be when it finally has documents of its own. Before we left, Marion gathered the evidence into a single binder and slid it across the desk to me. I felt its weight in my hands. It wasn't heavy the way shame is. It was heavy the way something real is. Outside, the air bit at my lungs. The sidewalks had been dusted with salt that crackled under our wheels. As Holden navigated the curb, cut a gust lifted the edge of my blanket and then set it down again. We moved through a city that seemed to be bracing against the cold the same way I was, chin-tucked, shoulders squared forward anyway. At the corner, a bus roared past, spraying slush. A man laughed on his phone. The ordinary world kept tugging at its threads. Somewhere across town, a house in Bend waited to be called what it was. Somewhere in Boise, a nurse's photograph leaned inside a frame. And inside my chest, the name that had found me refused to be packed away. A week after a bitter cold snap glazed Portland's courthouse steps, Jude Harper faced the Sterling family in a packed courtroom. Reporters huddled outside their breath-fogging lenses while inside the light filtered thinly through snow-frosted windows. The gallery buzzed with onlookers drawn by the case's growing attention. Marion Jude's lawyer set a binder down with a thud, presenting an anonymous email and bank records tracing funds from Evelyn Harper's trust to a down payment for a Bend property. The evidence was clear dates, routing numbers, and a precise sum. The judge leaned forward, admitting the documents with a hint of intrigue. Across the aisle, Victor Sterling's jaw clenched. Margaret stared at her folded hands, and Elliot's leg bounced restlessly. The Sterling's lawyer, polished and persuasive, countered with a packet of alleged counseling records painting Jude as unreliable, haunted by perceptions of abandonment. Jude's chest tightened, memories of a high school guidance office flooding back forms filled out Victor's dismissive pat, as if Jude's art were a flaw. Marion dismantled the ploy, revealing the packet's seal was fake, signed by a doctor dead since 2015. She noted Jude's hospital records showed him alert, yet the Sterlings refused to be his emergency contact. The judge frowned at the forgery, and Elliot blurted, "He's only here for the money." The mask slipped, murmurs rippled, and Jude stood, voice thin, but firm. I didn't come back. I was never let in. Silence blanketed the room. Marion closed. "This is about exclusion and diverted funds." A threatening text arrived. "Keep going and we'll tell everyone what your mother was," but Marion urged Jude to focus on facts, not fear. In the next hearing, snow muffled Portland's edges, and the courtroom crackled with anticipation. Marion laid out the case methodically, adoption papers naming Jude as Evelyn's grandson, certified mail receipts, an obituary, and a bank transfer to the Sterling's account. Nurse Grace testified, her voice steady, reading from a hospital chart at 11:04 p.m. The Sterlings said, "He's not our son," and left. Victor interrupted, claiming they acted in Jude's best interest, but Marion exposed their forged records. Jude held Evelyn's letter, its corners worn soft, and read, Jude, you were never abandoned. You are my blood. You are my boy. The words landed heavily, draining color from Margaret's face. Victor slammed the table. Elliot's jaw twitched. The judge froze the Sterling's assets, declaring Jude the lawful beneficiary of Evelyn's trust. Reporters rushed out, broadcasting the story, a man reclaiming his name, a family's deceit exposed. Outside, snow thickened, and Jude spoke softly to a camera. I'm not a shadow anymore. The final hearing brought a charged heir to the courthouse, now under TV lights. Marion detailed bank records linking the trust to a 2018 Sterling purchase. Neighbor Nora Walsh testified, recalling Margaret hiding Evelyn's certified letters and denying Jude's place. Grace reiterated the hospital abandonment, her signature anchoring the truth. The judge's tone hardened. This suggests criminal exposure. Victor shouted, admitting he took the letters to protect his legacy. Margaret pleaded, tears streaking, I raised you for 25 years. Jude recalled her calling Elliot the only son, her gentle pull from a photo booth. The judge ordered the trust to Jude and froze Sterling assets for investigation. Elliot's head hit the table. Margaret deflated. Jude's name, Jude Harper, rang like a bell. In the hallway, cameras flashed, but Jude felt unburdened, his name settling where doubt once lived. By February, Portland softened. At Rustic Brew, Jude met Lydia Harper, whose silver hair framed a face from Evelyn's obituary. She unwrapped a fabric bracelet labeled Baby Jude and shared stories of Celeste, Jude's gentle mother, and Evelyn's yearly letters sent certified, hoping Jude was loved. Jude spoke of the hospital, the crash, and the courtroom's truths. Lydia listened, hands warming on her coffee. Jude began volunteering at Multnomah County Library, reading to kids on soft carpets. A girl asked, Do you have a family? Jude smiled. It took a while to find them. Driving to Boise with Holden, Jude visited Evelyn's grave, brushing snow from her stone and leaving a red carnation. I survived, he whispered. Holden revealed a former Sterling employee sent the key email, haunted by Jude's abandonment. Back in Portland, Jude kept the bracelet and a silver ring by his bed, the past now survivable. On a rainy morning, he stood outside the library, imagining Evelyn writing letters in Boise, believing in a boy who'd one day claim them. Jude spoke his name, Jude Harper, without catching the